Over the weekend, Tucker Carlson interviewed the Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian. That interview was subsequently published yesterday. Early on in their conversation, Carlson asked Pezeshkian whether Iran was pursuing nuclear weapons.
The American President Donald Trump has said that the United States bombed your enrichment facilities because the government of Iran refused to give up its nuclear program, and that there can be no peace until Iran does give up that nuclear program. Would you be willing to give up the nuclear program in exchange for peace?
It was Netanyahu since 1984 has created this false mentality that Iran seeks a nuclear bomb, and it has insinuated that Iran is trying to develop a nuclear bomb in the past, and it has put it in the minds of every U.S. president since then, and to make them believe that we would like to have a nuclear bomb. But the truth is that we have never been after developing a nuclear bomb, not in the past, not presently, or in the future, because this is wrong, and this is in contrast to the religious decree or the fatwa, which has been issued by His Eminence, the Supreme Leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, that so it is religiously forbidden for us to go after a nuclear bomb. And this was always corroborated thanks to our cooperation with IAEA, because they were always there that to verify this and to substantiate that we have never wanted a nuclear bomb.
How many times have you heard that, by the way, in the media? There was a fatwa by Khamenei, I think in 2003 was the last one, against the development of nuclear technology, specifically with weapons. So you've got the Israelis, you've got all kinds of people in this country, hawks in the US as well, people that want war. The Iranians are developing nuclear weapons. Well, whether they are or not, and the IAEA had absolutely no evidence of them developing nuclear weapons. They were trying to become a threshold nuclear power by enriching uranium, but not to the levels needed for nuclear weapons. Similar story with Japan, for instance, threshold nuclear power. Turkey's about to try and become a threshold nuclear power, but they hadn't enriched uranium sufficiently to create nuclear weapons. How many times in that conversation, whether or not they're trying to create those weapons, have you heard from the media, well, their own head of state, the supreme leader, issued a fatwa against the moral legitimacy of nuclear weapons? How many times have you heard that? The mad mullahs. So mad. If you Google that, by the way, very few mentions of it in the English-speaking language. One of them is an article from Harvard University. It's almost like they don't want you to know quite important facts. Later, Carlson asked whether the Israelis tried to kill Pezeshkian and other members of the Iranian government.
Do you believe the Israeli government tried to assassinate you?
They did try, yes, and they acted accordingly, but they failed. And as a true believer, I believe that it is in the hands of the God Almighty to determine when a person will die or will not die.
With respect, can you tell us how you know that you were an assassination target? A week and a half ago, I don't believe I've seen that confirmed anywhere. How are you certain they tried to kill you?
Of course, it was not the U.S. that was behind my the attempt on my life. It was Israel. I was in a meeting. We were discussing the ways to move forward. But thanks to the intelligence by the spies that they had, they tried to bombard the area that we were holding that meeting. My proposal is that the U.S. administration should refrain from getting involved in a war that is not its war. That is not America's war. It is Netanyahu's war that is having its devilish machinations for the whole region. It has its own agenda. He has his own agenda, Netanyahu, I mean, inhuman agenda, and that is having forever wars that go on and on and on. And this is my proposal to the United States, not to be fooled by Netanyahu, not to be dragged into this kind of war.
He knows what he's talking about, right? He knows his audience, forever wars. Tucker Carlson goes, oh my God, forever wars? We can absolutely have nothing to do with it. Quite interesting that word would be used, that phrase would be used. Next up, Carlson asked whether the US should be afraid of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Many Americans are afraid of Iran. You say you're not afraid, but Americans are afraid of Iran. And they believe that Iran would like to strike the United States with a nuclear weapon. They see video of Iranians saying death to America, describing our country as the great Satan. What is your opinion of that? Should we be afraid of Iran?
I believe that this is a very wrong impression that anybody might have of Iran or the Iranians. I would like to remind you that Iran has never invaded another country in the last 200 years. When they say death to the United States, it doesn't mean death to, they don't mean death to the people of the United States or even to the officials of the United States. They mean death to crimes, death to killing and carnage, death to supporting killing others, death to insecurity and instability. This is. Have you ever heard that an Iranian killing an American? Have you ever heard that? Or a terrorist that was Iranian and he carried out a terrorist attack against the Americans? No, it was your president who confessed that the Americans created the ISIS in our region, and they were responsible for this wrong image that is portrayed of religion or the Muslims in the world. And once again, I would like to tell you and remind you that this is not death to the American people or to the officials, death to crimes and atrocities, to bullying, to the use of force, and anybody who would like to become an accomplice in the crimes perpetrated by others.
Do you believe that? That's the stupidest thing I think I've heard this week. Death to America. It doesn't really mean death to America. No, Baba. It doesn't mean a death to America. It means a death to the killing. Death to the killing. Very Iranian. I love it. It sounds just like my dad, although my dad wouldn't say something that's stupid. Look, the Iranians have got themselves in a spin on this because in 1979, you have the US hostage crisis, a bunch of students kidnapped basically 50 American nationals. And ever since then, for a big chunk of US civil society, and particularly its political class, that's how they regard Iran. He said, when was the last time there have been Iranian terrorists? The Iranian hostage crisis. Right? In recent years, 100%. That point about not invading a foreign country for 200 years, broadly true. Broadly true. The idea of a sovereign Iran making a declaration of war against another country, true. Yes. Okay? Yes, the Shah was kind of friendly with the Third Reich. Yes, they've funded proxies in the region in terms of trying to maximize their perceived national interests, etc. But actual war, a really long time ago. Really long time ago. The last kind of conventional war they were involved in, which they kind of started, was 200 years ago. All true. But they do say death to America, and they don't really mean like death to the killing. It does feel to me that there's a part of the Iranian establishment that wants to build some kind of relationship with America because they're beginning to perceive that Israel is going so far that actually bits of the US recognize it's not in their rational self-interest to back those guys anymore. But it's very hard because your muscle memory over the last 50 years is saying death to America and the US hostage crisis. It's very hard, particularly as a conservative in that country. But paradoxically, I've been to Iran, I'm half Iranian. Loads of Iranians love Americans. They love the West. They love Germany. On Duolingo, if you look at the region, this is crazy, it's true. the whole of Asia, everybody is learning English as the number one language on Duolingo, except Iran, where they're learning German. Always strange, iconoclastic people, Iranians, I like to say. I found that a really enlightening interview, not least because you got the scoop about the Israelis potentially trying to take out the entire Iranian government. I think that's quite useful news, personally. I think it's quite a useful thing to know. But given recent events in the UK, particularly the proscription of Palestine action, it also raises really interesting questions about media freedom. Britain is not at war with Iran, and there's certainly no support in this country for an Iraq-style war in a country 3 times larger next door. But what would the response be if Novara interviewed the likes of Pezeshkian? That's just one example. More on that in a moment. But first, that same point of media freedom was made by Tucker Carlson himself on X over the weekend, ahead of that interview being published.
We just finished up an interview with Masoud Pezeshkian, who is the president of Iran, the 70-year-old heart surgeon who leads the country we were just at war with about a week and a half ago. We know we'll be criticized for doing this interview. Why did we do it anyway? Well, we did it because we were just at war with Iran 10 days ago and maybe again. And so our view, which has remained consistent over time, is that American citizens have the constitutional right and the God-given right to all the information they can gather about matters that affect them. If their country is doing something with their money in their name, they have a right, an absolute right, to know as much about it as they can. And that would include hearing from the people they're fighting.
He's right. He's right. In the UK right now, we can't even interview someone from Palestine Action because of the 2000 Terrorism Act, let alone the leader of Iran. And by the way, if you think what Tucker Carlson is doing by interviewing the likes of Vladimir Putin and Masoud Pezeshkian is without precedent, it's never happened before, think again. On the eve of the first Gulf War, Pete Arnett interviewed Saddam Hussein for CNN. That was a channel started by progressive media tycoon Ted Turner. Colin Powell tried to stop that happening, with Turner being accused of appeasement of Saddam Hussein, giving him a platform, being a patsy, a puppet for a foreign leader. We've heard that a fair few times over the years, haven't we? So you see, none of this is new. These questions about interviewing senior foreign figures didn't start with Tucker Carlson. And this is something I want to throw out to our audience. How important do you think it is for these kinds of interview to happen? On a technical level, it's very hard to interview somebody in different languages. Actually, you often don't get much value out of it. But I think the principle of having dialogue with civil society and, yes, politicians in countries like Russia, Venezuela, Iran, China, anywhere, frankly, is of huge importance. For a free democratic society, you should be trying to listen to as many perspectives from as many people as possible. Marcus, back to the content of that interview. What did you make of the claim that Israel tried to kill Iran's president?
Yeah, well, I mean, to bring it back to what you're saying then, there's obviously untold potential in learning, and there's a deep worth in learning anything. Even if it's propaganda, you learn something from learning, don't you? And there's probably something in that the people who would now feel comfortable interviewing quote-unquote enemies of the West are now these figures like Tucker Carlson, these kind of maverick figures in the American ruling class, rather than maybe 20 years ago when it would have been figures like Robert Fisk or John Pilger, or even Tony Benn flew out to Baghdad to interview Saddam Hussein. I think it's frightening that this kind of dialogue, which for whatever good it does, it is intended that a degree of civil society or political interest from a wing of one country is trying its best to intervene to shape the influence of its own country on another country via dialogue and information. Even if that in the final analysis is not allowed, the idea that it just stopped by an IDF assassination, for example, is terrifying. I mean, so Mark Seddon, who worked at the United Nations for a very long time, but before that, he was the editor of Tribune, actually, and he was on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, representing the party's left wing. It's in the former Labour MP Chris Mullin's diary somewhere, although I can't remember which one, about, I think in the last NEC meeting prior to the Iraq War, Seddon had just come back from interviewing, that close to the invasion of Iraq. he'd just come back for interviewing Saddam Hussein's Deputy Prime Minister, Tariq Aziz. And he had a message, which was that, he'd met all of the British Prime Ministers from Edward Heath onwards, but he'd never met Blair. And he gave Seddon a written instruction, tell Tony Blair we have no weapons of mass destruction, and tell him that he's welcome to come to Baghdad and see for himself. And there's a line in it where he says, I can't really remember what Tony Blair's reaction was, other than he was just purely incredulous. And, these things happened so recently. There was a wider consideration for debate and civil society and the democratic considerations than now.
Yeah, it's really an important point, right? I mean, your publication, Tribune, I think it was Barbara Castle writing for Tribune, am I right, Marcus? She was one of the people really highlighting what was going on in Kenya in the final years of British colonialism there, British occupation. And I feel almost like in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s for sure, this country was in a much better place with regards to critique of foreign policy. What do you make of that? Do you think it's gotten worse? Because, of course, we're talking about 2003. That's 20 years ago. Do you think it's worse today than it was in 2003? Do you think the direction of travel is to somewhere where more and more censorship, and less rather capacity for self-critique, it's self-reflection on foreign policy? Which way do you think the wind is going?
Well, I never think it's been perfect. I mean, since 1945, there's always been a time and a place where the British state steps in to defend its imperial interests. I mean, one of the strongest examples I can just immediately comes to mind was a journalist called Alan Winnington, who wrote some of the first major anthropological texts in the early 60s about China. Real groundbreaking anthropologist. But he was only in China because he lost his British citizenship for reporting that in the Daily Worker at the time, it's now the Morning Star, he reported that British soldiers had been beheading Malaysian guerrillas for fun, people fighting for their independence and their rights from the British state. He got his citizenship taken off him and was called a traitor for reporting that. And so it's never been perfect. And you look, time and time again as the British media and its lies in the 6 counties of Ireland. So it's never been 100%. It's never been particularly decent or pluralistic, but it's certainly wider, and there was certainly much more room for manoeuvre for progressive people and supporters of human rights than I say there would be now.
Yeah, I think we're moving in a very strange direction. I mean, I think that's right. I think doing something like that today probably very hard. But I think the broader culture, I think it's definitely in reverse, right? I think the heyday, 70s, maybe even the 80s, with regards to people like you say, John Pilger, Robert Fisk, I feel like we're moving away from that now. I mean, there's obviously a great deal of journalism done on this stuff, but I'm talking about the broader culture. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, look, Tucker Carlson, he might be a deep state asset for the CIA. I have no idea. His father was CIA, of course. But Tucker Carlson is conducting these interviews, I suppose. But I do hate this pernicious culture where people tell you with power what to think and who to like. And look, Tucker Carlson has been a grifter in the past. He's lied about a ton of things. I want people in the chat and watching and listening to this to know I don't think Tucker Carlson all of a sudden is, give this guy a Pulitzer. But he did say something I really liked, which is you don't get to tell me who I like. You don't get to tell me who I trust. You don't get to do that. I'm a free person. That is what enlightenment is meant to be. Read What is Enlightenment by Immanuel Kant. Das ist Aufklärung. Read it. It basically says that. Enlightenment is the capacity to make up your mind without the imposition of the prejudices and perspectives of other people. Thinking for yourself. Dare to think for yourself. We're in a funny spot in the West. If Tucker Carlson, of all people, is the embodiment of enlightenment values in the media, I'd like to think Novara Media is as well. I'd like to think Tribune is as well, with Marcus dropping some very, very, very important knowledge there. If you like our work here in Novara Media and you want to be part of building a new media for different politics, you know what to do. Go to novaramedia.com/support. The link is in the description below. We are marching. You, me, all of us. The Novara army is marching to 1 million YouTube subscribers. If you're watching and you've not already subscribed to this channel, what are you doing? Get us over the line. We need 4,000 more of you to make us a 1 million subscriber channel. If you've already done that and you don't support us, Why not do that as well?